Welcome to another episode of Untethered Talks. I recently conducted an interview with Bart Sibrel. Bart is an award-winning filmmaker, writer, and investigative journalist who has been producing television programs and documentaries for many years. Bart has worked as a news reporter and has produced videos shown on ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, TLC, and BET. Bart is perhaps best known for a documentary called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, in which he exposed original film footage of the Apollo 11 moon landing mission of NASA as fraudulent. He also confronted several of the astronauts involved in the moon missions in Astronauts Gone Wild. Bart even got punched by Buzz Aldrin in that video, so we talked a little bit about that too. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Welcome to the show, Bart. I really appreciate you being here today, man.
No problem.
Awesome. Now, you're perhaps best known for your documentary called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. Can you tell us how you got the footage of them faking the moon mission and how getting this footage has changed your life?
Well, I grew up believing that the moon missions were real like everybody else, and even to a greater degree. I had a shrine of about 20 Apollo 11 pictures on my wall for 10 years before I ever questioned whether they were real or not. And then basically a man who builds rockets for NASA gave me $1 million to make a movie about how the moon missions were fake. And I think he would know, right, if he's building rockets for NASA. And so I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. And there's certainly, in the early stages, enough evidence to indicate that that could very well have been a possibility. So this film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which you can actually see for free at Sibrel.com. It's just my last name, S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. You can watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon for free. Hit the top left button. Actually, I think it's on the homepage now. And about 3.5 years into the 7-year project, I was pretty exhaustive with looking for footage because I figured if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it because they never faked it before. So I told NASA I want every picture from the first moon mission, all film and all video. And everything came pre-edited. I mean, you couldn't even get the countdown going from T plus a minute to 0. I mean, everything's meticulously edited, no unedited footage. So I finally, I asked for everything and went through tape after tape after tape after tape. And second to the last tape, I pop in a tape and it said on the screen, "Do not show to the public." I'm like, oh, well, this should be pretty good. So as usual, I hit fast forward and I see the same shot for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's like allegedly the blue earth floating in space. Allegedly, they have the camera lens at the window as they're halfway to the moon looking back at the earth. Well, the lights come up and you see it's a 1-foot model of the earth. And at the beginning of the tape, you hear the CIA telling them basically not to answer NASA right away because it gives away the fact that they've been in Earth orbit the entire time. And what a surprise, here we are 55 years later, and they can only send mannequins to orbit the moon because of the lethal radiation. They still cannot send a person beyond Earth orbit 50 years later. So what we uncovered was them faking being halfway to the moon with a third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay to give the impression that they're halfway to the moon, and they're creating a little fake Earth floating in space with a 1-foot model. And so when I discovered this, I mean, it was a life-changing experience. First, I just wept quietly. I'm like, wow, they really did fake the moon landing. It's not a theory. They really did fake it. And I have footage right in my house, back when I discovered it, of them faking being halfway to the moon. Neil Armstrong's on camera, Buzz Aldrin's on camera, and we have a third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay from Earth orbit. And I'm like, oh, they never left Earth orbit. And I'm like, eesh. And then I get scared. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have one of the greatest government secrets and proof thereof in my house. What have I got myself into? And I realized that the fact that they really did fake the moon landing is actually more profound historically than if they had actually gone. It's more significant to mankind that the fact is that they faked it than if they could fly out to Iraq, plant a flag, and come back. Okay, whoop-de-doo. But if they didn't have the guts, the integrity, or government to admit that they set a goal that they couldn't do, and then they completely fabricated it at taxpayers' expense, and even went so far as to murder their own citizens who were going to expose it. And this isn't my opinion, this is the opinion of the dead people's relatives, some of whom are Apollo astronauts who were murdered for not cooperating. They told me that their relative, who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, was murdered by the CIA. They told me that. You know, it's not my opinion, it's their opinion. So we have a government who's not only faking the moon landing, they're killing their own people to cover it up. And they're doing it, they're taking our money to do it. I mean, it's outrageous. And so, and these same type of people are still in power. Otherwise, they admit that the moon landing was fraud and will never do that again. You see, they're still defending it, knowing that it's fake. So they're still part of that criminal cabal. And so, yeah, I mean, when you realize that mankind is so fallen, so depraved, that they would fake the greatest accomplishment of mankind, I mean, wow. You realize that they really did. I mean, it's like a cold glass of water being thrown in your face, and then you realize you're sleepwalking, and you look down, and you're 1 foot from a cliff. Like, wow, they really, and it just, and then of course, all these crazy things started happening, like phone calls interrupted and being followed, being drugged, and all sorts of things that I go into the book at Sibrel.com for the first time. It's an audiobook that I read, or you can get it in print or Kindle. And I go into great detail about the kind of the behind the scenes adventures in making the $1 million movie financed by someone who builds rockets for NASA, called The Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. And then a few years after the film came out, which exposes this footage in it, I had the idea, well, why not just track down a few Apollo astronauts and put a Bible in front of them and see if they'll swear on the Bible. Of course, I knew they didn't go. And that film ended up being called Astronauts Gone Wild, which you can also see for free at Sibrel.com, because one astronaut punches me, one astronaut kicks me, one astronaut threatens to hit me, one astronaut threatens to shoot me. And on one occasion, after I showed one of the Apollo astronauts the footage of them faking being halfway to the moon, he assaults me from behind, and in the commotion, I leave a wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my camera operator forgets to hit stop recording. So while the astronaut and his son are in the privacy of their house with the door closed, we're recording their audio in the backseat of the rental car in the driveway. And months later, the film secretary did a transcript and calls me up frantic. And I'm like, well, calm down. What's going on? She says, do you know what they're talking about in their house before you U-turned and picked up your expensive microphone? I said, I don't know what. She says, they're talking about calling the CIA to have you killed. I'm like, yeah, that's funny. She says, no, Bart, they're talking about calling the CIA. So I get, and sure enough, they are. Now, if they really went to the moon, and I'm some silly person who thinks it was done in a TV studio, why would they care? Why would the CIA care, right? The fact that I do have the footage proving it, and is why the CIA is involved in the faking of it and in the faking of killing uncooperative Apollo astronauts, and they were considering killing me too. And one of the things in the book I go into is I was, had this footage. I was trying to get it to CNN. I called the chapter in the book, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to CNN. And I'm literally surrounded by government agents at CNN and drugged with true serum, so strong I'm vomiting. And they had a list of pre-prepared questions, where's the original and blah, blah, blah. I told them everything they wanted to know. So you don't have to torture people to get information, write them $1 billion check or give them true serum, you know what I mean? In any case, believe it or not, I escaped their custody And I made my way back to Nashville, and I said, kind of, overconfidently, apparently, I got him. I got truth serum in me. I'm going to prove I was drugged by the CIA with this truth serum. So I peed in a cup and I gave it to a friend to put in a lab in his name, thinking I could outwit the CIA. And a couple of days go by and he, tells me that there was a problem at the lab. And I'm like, well, what kind of problem? He says, well, they had a break-in over the weekend. I'm like, yeah, so what? He says, well, funny thing, the only thing stolen was a urine sample. So that plan didn't work out too well. But I've showed this footage of fake photography, which you can see for free at Sibrel.com. And two news directors at NBC agreed it absolutely proved the moon missions were fake. One of them chickened out. They said, if I broadcast this, it will cause a civil war. And I'm like, you mean if we show how corrupt the federal government is, it will bring down the corrupt federal government? Isn't that a good thing? And then 10 years go by, another news director has a different opinion. Well, they both agreed that it definitely proves they never left Earth orbit, which means they didn't go to the moon, that the landings were fake. And they said, we're going to broadcast this nationwide, TV special, and they get a call from the federal government threatening them, and they back down. And so it's a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. I mean, you can prove they didn't go to the moon with logic, because today, with NASA's best technology, 50 years better technology, the farthest they can send a human being into space is 250 miles to the space station. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon in the Artemis mission, because humans can't do it yet without being killed, right? I mean, you can't play golf and drive cars on the moon 50 years ago, and then 50 years later, you can only send mannequins to orbit? Come on. Basically, the moon is 1,000 times farther than the farthest they can send astronauts today. So what they're really saying is they had 1,000 times greater technology in 1969 than they do today. Well, you can't have greater technology in the past than in the future. Cell phones weren't better in the past. They were worse in the past, you see? So the fact that they're making the claim that they can send people 1,000 times farther into space in 1969 than they can today proves that they made it up. I mean, I have shadows I show in the book that are intersecting at 90 degrees that they claim were taken in sunlight. I mean, come on, I'm a filmmaker. My job is to make fake scenes look real. Go out in your front yard on a sunny day, look at two trees, or have you and a friend stand 5 feet apart. Your shadows always run parallel. They never intersect. They can't in sunlight. And we have pictures intersecting at 90 degrees all over the place on practically every Apollo mission, which means they're using electrical light, which means they're on Earth. I mean, you can prove it with one photograph of two objects that they claim are on the moon that are 5 feet apart, where one shadow's at 9 o'clock and one shadow's at 12 o'clock. I mean, it can't happen in sunlight, which means it's fake. I mean, that's all the proof you need. And then the main thing that comes out of my book is a deathbed confession from an eyewitness who was there at a military base where they filmed it. And he said so on his deathbed. All of this is new information in the book, including the homicide of 3 Apollo astronauts who wouldn't cooperate. Not my opinion, the opinion of the dead man's widow and son, So that's the way it is. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but, if you have cancer, do you want to know? I would. And if the government is so arrogant and corrupt to fake the moon landing and to murder people who try to expose it, I think the public needs to know.
Wow. Well, you definitely touched on a lot of the questions I wanted to ask you about, so that's nice. One of the things you mentioned something I thought was interesting for people to know. Werner von Braun said that you'd have to have certain things to go to the moon. Can you tell people like what he said about that so that people have an understanding of what the reality was?
Yeah, I mean, I had $1 million budget. Well, a lot of that 7 years was spent on research, and some documents we paid $10,000 for that you could only find at the estates of dead astronauts being sold by their widows, to pay their bills. We found a document from von Braun that he told NASA plainly that in order to go to the moon nonstop in one rocket, it would have to weigh more than the Queen Mary of 800,000 tons. And he said, even at that, you're still going to need 3 trips with fuel to the space station first. And of course, the Saturn V, instead of weighing 800,000 tons, and he said these are mathematically irrefutable numbers, it only weighed 2,500 tons compared to 800,000 tons. It's a difference of 30,000%. We have the rocket designers saying that's the only way to go to the moon. So I don't know how a rocket that was 1/30,000% the size could go to the moon and back on one trip. He said it couldn't happen. And even today, they're saying in order to send humans to the moon, they're going to have to make 18 fuel trips to the space station first, which is exactly what von Braun said. You have to first build the space station, ferry up multiple trips of fuel in order to have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit, go to the moon, land, and come back. He said a couple other things. He said you also, as soon as you land, you have to go into a cave because there are micrometeorites, little pieces of sand that are traveling at 25,000 miles an hour, which will go through your skull and the spacesuit and the spacecraft and cause explosive decompression. He said the odds of being killed by a micrometeorite are 50% every 24 hours. So if you stay on the moon more than 2 days, you're guaranteed to die unless you have a lead shelter or go into a cave. And they were there 3 or 4 days. So, that didn't happen. So what can you do?
Well, yeah, that's a lot of interesting facts that they put out there on that. And I've learned these things over time, but you were one of the people that helped me get a lot of this information to start with. So now I think you've been asked this question, but Buzz Aldrin punched you in the face.
You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
Because you called him a coward. And I was just curious, did that hurt? And did you press charges?
Well, it didn't hurt at first, but I did have a toothache for about 5 years afterwards. I could never get that tooth to stop hurting. He's got a good punch. I didn't see it coming. It just more shocked me that he would do such a thing. And I was tempted. I got to admit it. I was tempted to sue him. I mean, we have 2 camera crews and we have an assault taking place on camera. Sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you, right? There's no justification for punching somebody for saying something that you don't like.
You had to pay good money to get him to even do the interview. So that must have really been.
Yeah, they all charge $2,000 an hour for the privilege of being lied to. So that's why I called him a thief, because he was stealing that money, and a liar for obvious reasons, and a coward, which is what upset him, for being afraid to look bad. That's why he won't come forward and tell the truth. He spent his whole life telling his family and his friends and everybody else that he went to the moon when he didn't. He's afraid to look bad. And so if I walked on the moon and someone thought that it was all a conspiracy in a TV studio, I would find that hysterically funny. And if someone wanted me to swear on a Bible, I'm like, I'll swear on 2. Would that make you feel, would 3 be better? But it was as if I walked up to him in front of his wife and said, "Oh, your mistress says hello." You see, a point that without a sword without a point causes no injury. So it's the fact that I was speaking the truth, making him look bad in front of his entourage, that upset him so much. And yeah, I thought about, well, I got him, I can sue him. I'll get maybe a couple $100,000 out of the guy. But I did. Unfortunately, the Bible is full of a lot of things, pretty much everything you ever need to know. It even says don't charge people interest unless they're foreigners. So the government shouldn't even allow banks to charge interest. Only the government should be able to lend money. Another story. But it also says when one person strikes you on the cheek, and where was I struck? On the cheek, and to offer them the other also. So that's what stopped me from suing him. Because I believe the Bible is true. I believe it contains wisdom. and we're supposed to love each other. And the Bible even says to love your enemy, right? And I couldn't do that. I couldn't sue him with a clear conscience, so I didn't do it.
Okay. Now, I've heard you say something I thought was very interesting. You mentioned that someone had shown you a document that John F. Kennedy was aware of the plan to fake the moon landings. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, there was an elderly gentleman who was part of the Kennedy administration, and he gave me a document that shows it was being discussed during the Kennedy administration, the potentiality of faking it. I assumed they came up with that during Johnson's term. I didn't know it went back that far. As you know, part of Kennedy's staff suggested killing Americans and blaming it on Cuba in order to invade Cuba. I mean, our government actually suggested that. Now, I think technically, if I talk about a plan to kill you, Vince, that's called attempted murder, I believe. And so you have these people in the government committing the crime of attempted murder, and Kennedy should have fired them and then thrown them in jail for suggesting such a thing. And this isn't the first time the CIA or the Pentagon suggested this. Hence 9/11. What's that all going about? Is that to push through legislation, an excuse for a war? They're sacrificing their own people all the time, because Robert McNamara, the whole reason the Vietnam War started, the alleged attack from a North Vietnamese ship on an American ship, he said it never happened. The CIA just made that up. So yeah, it was proposed not only to kill Americans and blame it on Cuba during Kennedy's administration, but to fake the moon landing in the event they couldn't do it. And apparently that's what they did. So,
wow. Now, you've mentioned Gus Grisham. For those who don't know, when he was talking about the astronaut that got murdered, Gus Grisham was the one that hung a lemon on the lunar lander, and you interviewed Betty Grissom. Can you give me a little bit of information about like what happened in that interview, or what she told you, and like what?
Yeah, I interviewed her for 4 hours, and she asked me not to put the information in the book. I mean, sorry, in the film, but to wait until pretty much after she died, and then I could publish it in the book, which is what I did. The first thing that struck me interviewing her was she was still angry, pissed off that the government murdered her husband. Because what happened is on January 27th, 1967, Virgil Grissom came home from work at NASA, rehearsing the moon launch, and said, honey, for some strange reason, CIA agents are all over NASA launch pad today. I've never seen the CIA here in years. Then they suddenly show up. I wonder why they're here. Very next day, the guy's dead. And so they killed him and 2 other people, Ed White and Roger Chaffee. This is the crew that was gonna be the first crew to walk on the moon, because he was the most beloved astronaut by the media and the public. And days before he burned alive, he was so frustrated that the equipment was just nowhere near to being able to go to the moon. He said it's going to take 10 years, not 2, to go to the moon. And his fury of the higher ups not fixing anything, because they knew they were going to fake it, and they hadn't told the astronauts yet. So that's why bother fixing stuff we're not going to use, right? He held an impromptu press conference, and Betty told me that morning he was a bit of a gardener, and in his yard in Houston or Florida, wherever they lived, he had like a lemon tree, an orange tree, a grapefruit tree, one of each kind. And he had a lemon that was huge, like the size of a grapefruit. And she remembers he plucked it off that day, brought it to work, and then took a coat hanger and he affixed it, so that it was hanging by the coat hanger. And then, without permission, he held the press conference where he invited some reporters up to the top of the rocket, where he hung a lemon on the top of the rocket and said this thing is a piece of junk. He was so mad at NASA for not fixing anything. Days later, the guy's dead. And, after the CIA shows up, right? What a coincidence. So what's going on. And then that was a warning, to the other crews to, play ball or you want to end up like them. Right.
Wow. So how did he get incinerated again? How did that happen?
Well, according to Betty, what they did is they intentionally made it more difficult to get out of the space capsule. They would basically sit in the space capsule day after day, week after week, month after month, rehearsing various launch procedures and emergency scenarios, just like you rehearse anything else. And so they reversed the door, and instead of opening outwardly, which you would want to do for an emergency, right? Every exit and movie theaters and restaurants and everything opens outwardly. You don't want a bunch of people crowding at the door and pulling it in on themselves. They did that in the 1900s and it killed hundreds of people. And they finally, figured it out. That's a code. Doors open outwardly. Okay. So, but for some reason, the day before they try a new door and it opens inwardly. It takes all this time and all these procedures just to open the thing. Then they decide to also pressurize the capsule during this, rehearsal with 100% oxygen. Now, under those circumstances, steel wool will catch on fire. And then they apparently put some sort of explosive device in there. And she said there was a pile of rags soaked in oil stuck under his chair in the spacecraft.
Wow.
And apparently there was cyanide in there as well. They basically they had two ways of killing them, either with a fire or with cyanide gas. And it's a terrible thing they did. And if you believe in righteousness by government, you have to remember that our first document of the United States of America, the country that really is different than any other, it's not the Constitution, it's the Declaration of Independence. And when they said, we're risking our lives, what happened was the Boston Massacre, I think in 1770, happened. And the federal government, you could say, killed 5 people. And they said, that's it. No more. We're willing to risk our lives, our property, everything. And how many people, died? Apollo astronauts have they murdered? More than 5. And then other times elsewhere we can go into. But basically, after that, the founding fathers and mothers wrote that when any government, federal government, is destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it. You can't have the government killing their own people. I mean, people have a right to be free and to not be killed, right? So we have proof that the federal government is killing their own people. They're killing NASA employees who won't cooperate with the fake moon landing, okay? And then liberty. The Constitution and the right to freedom of movement, freedom of travel, freedom of, running a business or living in your house or holding parties or whatever you want to do, it doesn't change if it gets below 50 degrees. And it doesn't change if the wind speed gets above 75. And it doesn't change if cancer rates go above 10%. And it doesn't change if there's a respiratory virus going around, you see? So the fact that you have to open up your business with permission and go to church with permission and go to the beach with permission from another person who's supposed to be equal to you, that is slavery. That is one person enslaving another person. Now, the best way to have a slave is to call them free. You're free, the land of the free, right? It's not the land of the free, it's the land of slaves. And then they have the audacity to tell everybody we have the best healthcare in the world when the exact opposite is true. Do you realize that 70% of Americans are on prescription medicine? That means 70% of Americans are sick. Is there any country in the entire world that has 70% of the population sick all the time? Whatever country that is, has the worst healthcare in the world. Even statistically, If you remove cancer and heart disease, the number one cause of death, admitted, is medical malpractice. We have the worst healthcare in the world and the least freedom in the world. It's ridiculous. So, and if it's the pursuit of your happiness to have a party or a wedding reception or open your business, they're taking away that. I mean, in one state in the union, you were allowed to have 4 people over at a time. And if you had 5 people over, they would turn off your electricity and arrest everybody and throw you in jail for having a party. They wouldn't let somebody have their own wedding reception. Sorry. Well, who is it? I mean, Vince, can you tell me legally that I cannot have a wedding reception? But that's what they're doing. The people in the government, they're just people. They're just like Vince. They're just like Bart. How can Bart tell Vince, no, you can't have 5 people in your house? I don't live there. That's slavery. How can people not see that? So our government is destructive of life. They're murdering their own people. Liberty, you have to ask permission to open your business, and the pursuit of happiness, having parties, getting weddings. It's outrageous. They're so arrogant. They fake the moonlight. They're so arrogant, they kill their own president. You want to talk about election interference? Shooting Kennedy by the CIA is election interference. It's not my opinion. It's the dead man's nephew opinion. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. has more access to the Kennedy assassination files than Oliver Stone. And he said the CIA killed his uncle. Betty Grissom said the CIA killed Gus Grissom. I think they know. This is our government. They've never been stopped. They still say Oswald did it. They still say the moon landings are real. You see, these people have to be stopped. I mean, does anybody care? The moon landing fraud just proves their utter arrogance toward the people they're supposed to serve. They're supposed to be the servants, and yet they're the masters. You see, when did that turn upside down? When did that happen?
Yeah. Well, 2020 was really the reason why I got into doing my own videos, because when I saw that, I felt like the New World Order was right on our doorstep, and I'm really glad that we didn't get the surveillance, vaccine passports back then, but they're working on it. They're working on all kinds of things, the geofences. And
yes, they are, aren't they?
Digital currency may be the way.
Little bees, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you said a lot of great things, and now you said there were 5 astronauts that you think were murdered by the CIA. Do you?
Well, more than that, actually. I mean, ones that we know of. I know of 5, and then I didn't investigate, but other journalists have. Basically, we have the 3 from the Apollo 1 fire. We have James Irwin, who in August of 1991 calls up the leading moon landing fraud researcher at the time, which wasn't me, it was Bill Casey. He was my mentor. And Bill Casey went on Oprah, wrote a book, We Didn't Go to the Moon. It's kind of a, celebrity of sorts of the moon landing. And one of the astronauts tracked him down, calls him up. You can imagine my surprise if Buzz Aldrin calls me up and says, we need to talk, right? So one of the Apollo astronauts calls up Bill Casey in August of 1991, says, we need to talk about your book. He goes on to say the reason is because he just became a born-again Christian. We need to talk about the moon landing frauds. He says, I'm concerned for my safety. He knew about the Apollo 1 fire, didn't he? He says, why don't you call me at this number 3 days from now? And 3 days later, coincidentally, the astronaut had a fatal heart attack. Okay, so that's 4 deaths. And then my book, which you can get at Sibrel.com, and audio that I read or Kindle or print, it culminates with the deathbed confession of Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was chief of security at Cannon Air Force Base, where he eyewitnessed in 1968, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, the filming of Apollo 11 on the ground on Earth. He stood beside President Johnson while they filmed it. President Johnson gave him a list of 15 people who were allowed in. I published that list in the book. Some of the people are still alive. He went on to say, and this is not in the book because his son was alive when I published it, He murdered a coworker to keep it a secret. That's the fifth one. He's dying. He wants to get right with God. And as best as we can tell from the Bible, you confess your sin. It does say that, confess your sin. And of course, that really also means to renounce them, to not do them again. He said, I'm a murderer. I killed a coworker because he was going to go to a reporter and tell the world that the moon landings were fake because he thought it was morally wrong. He personally murdered him. He said the reason why he did it was to cover up the moon landing fraud, which President Johnson supervised and whom he received a list from of the 15 people who were allowed in to view it. We publish all this information in the book at Sibrel.com. So then there was a TV special done years ago by Fox. I think it was called Conspiracy Theory, Did We Go to the Moon? It kind of kicked off the series that apparently became of it. They found 4 other astronauts who died mysteriously during the Apollo program. They were backup crews, and they all had fatal accidents within a 2-year period of one another. So if you include the Apollo 1 fire in that time, that's 7 people dying within 24 months of each other who all work at NASA. I mean, come on, it's not a coincidence. There's somebody knocking these people off. So that's 7 that we know of. I'm sorry, that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that we know of. There's probably some more along the way. It probably killed fewer people than even the JFK assassination, which I understand as many as 200 people were killed to keep that a secret. But it's different. You see, whoever killed JFK, he's dead anyway. Whoever did 9/11, they're dead anyway. But this is different. This is candy. This is a sweet lie. This is taking away candy and giving someone a turd. This, according to the news director at NBC, when I showed him this footage of the fake moon landing, he agreed 100%. It proved the moon missions were fake. And he said, this is going to enrage the public. I'm not going to broadcast it. I'll go down in history as the man who caused the Civil War. Can you believe it? He was afraid to show the corruption of the federal government for fear the corrupt federal government would come to an end. I think that's what's supposed to happen. And then another 10 years go by, another news director finds it at NBC. They fly me to New York and they're going to pay me thousands of dollars and they interview me and they pull the plug. They told me because they got a threatening call from the United States government. So it's not a theory. They didn't go to the moon. It's a fact. And that's a sad fact because faking the moon landing is more significant historically than if they'd actually gone. This is an important truth that mankind needs to know. And if it doesn't come out, we're going to be stuck with criminals and murderers running the world.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's something I've always wondered about. You know, they have all these other space agencies like in Japan and Russia, China, and stuff like that. I wonder why none of them ever blew the whistle on the United States. Do you have any?
Well, they're blackmailing them. I mean, people use that as an argument that it must be real because Russia never said anything. Well, no, that's not the case. If I had a picture, let's say, of a world leader with a prostitute, I could upload it to the internet and take them down. And then the picture's not worth anything anymore, is it? Or I could blackmail them year after year after year, 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million. You see, what a coincidence that during the Apollo program, Nixon said Russia is the greatest threat to America, and then he starts selling grain to them below cost. What a coincidence during the Apollo program, he says China's the number 2 enemy. Then he flies over there, kisses their butt, and opens trade relations. I know someone who personally works at the space agency in China. He said everybody knows the moon missions were fake. And they have an agreement with the federal government of the United States not to say so in exchange for technology. We're being blackmailed. How about that? You see?
Man.
Smart chess players, you see, wouldn't blab. It makes their information worthless, right? No, they use it. That's what smart people do. You see, and China's smart and Russia's smart. You see, the other argument that people use as well, we had 400,000 people working on it. How can you keep a secret from that many people? I mean, come on, just think it one more step. Do you really think the CIA is stupid enough to tell the guy making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon. Be sure not to tell anybody. I mean, come on. That's like saying what a bank teller knows and what the CEO of the bank knows about corruption of the bank are the same. Bank teller is clueless. There were people in command center at Houston who said afterwards, we can't tell the difference between a rehearsal and a real flight. It's just the same. Bunch of numbers going by on a screen. You see, they don't even know. No independent press coverage. It's not like World War II going on Earth in front of everybody. It's up there in outer space. How do you know where they are? We have to take their word for it. How do you know these pictures are from the moon? We have to take their word for it. Nixon's word, the federal government's word, who killed their own president, right? You see? Robert McNamara said on his deathbed, this guy was defense secretary during the Vietnam War. Americans didn't want to get in that war, just like they didn't want to get into World War II after World War I. 90% of Americans on December 6, 1941, said we do not want to enter World War II. One day later, after Pearl Harbor, they needed to get even. So 90% were for. So Robert McNamara and the CIA got together. This isn't my opinion. Robert McNamara said so. He said we need a Pearl Harbor type thing to get the public support of the Vietnam War. So they staged an incident known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where allegedly a North Vietnamese ship attacked an American ship. It made the news and enraged the public, and now they had support and they went in Vietnam. He said on his deathbed, it never happened. Me and the CIA, we made it up. That led to the death of 58,220 Americans. I think if they're willing to kill that many of their own people without cause, they're willing to fake an image on a television. Don't you think? You see,
Yeah.
Independent press coverage. And people wanted to believe it. Don't forget that, Vince. Rick Nixon actually said this out of his mouth. It boggles the mind. He said the number one threat against America is not Russia, not China. It's Americans protesting the federal government over the Vietnam War. So you give them a pep rally, you give them candy, you give them the moon landing. We actually published in the book at Sibrel.com the CIA code name for the fake moon landing because our eyewitness told us the code name. Slam dunk. President Johnson personally came up with the code name. You see, by faking it, you can guarantee 100% success because it's recorded on videotape a year in advance. They went to the moon, they came back, we got it on tape ready to show. You see, so that makes going to the moon easy. That makes going to the moon a slam dunk, you see, and you give it this candy, this guaranteed successful mission, you see, during the Vietnam War protests, and he gives them something to cheer about. And the news director at NBC, he was right. You know, I didn't even realize it at the time. It's like he understood the magnitude of the moon landing being different. I mean, whoever shot JFK, he's dead. Whoever, you know, did 9/11, they're dead. But he understood that it's taking candy away. And it'll outrage people because they printed it on coins, they put it on stamps, it's in the encyclopedia. They gave them, what is it, ticker tape parades. They gave them medals of honor for lying so well. You see, it shows the utter arrogance and depravity of the federal government to fake the moon landing, mankind's greatest accomplishment, and to cover it up by killing their own astronauts. And then Nixon had the audacity, when he knew they were not on the moon, to say, putting a man on the moon is the greatest event since God created the universe, when he knew they weren't there. You see, this is a spiritual lesson. This needs to be known. Mankind and Americans need to know these are the people running our government. It's dangerous because Republican Nixon gave it the thumbs up and Democratic Johnson supervised it. It's not about red and blue. They didn't vote on faking the moon landing. They didn't ask Congress and the Senate to vote, should we fake the moon? They did it anyway. So voting for your representative is pointless. 90% of Americans wanted GMO labeling. Do you realize that? 90% of Americans wanted to know whether their ketchup contained a GMO. And the president vetoed it. Said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what the corporations asked me to do. 90% of Americans can't have their way. How could that possibly be a democracy?
Yeah. Well, at least he made a phone call, and talked to the guys on the moon, right?
Yeah, I'm still having cell phone problems, but they can call the moon in 1999 somehow. But what can you do?
Oh,
They must have had a bigger battery, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I shared a meme on that. President Nixon called the astronauts on the moon, and there's like a little toll booth sitting on the moon. And they're like, and it says, "Think about it" at the bottom. You're like, Yeah, and I shared that, and it's a lot of silence. I can tell it's hard for people to really fathom this being a lie, but I really feel like that's a good one right there. There's no possible way. There's a landline phone.
Is that AT&T made a bundle? I think it was like $15 million a minute for that long distance call. So they did pretty good on it,
Oh man. Hey, you mentioned something earlier. I want to make sure I ask about this because you actually brought up something I had a question about. Now, I heard stories from Andrew Womack, a preacher, talking about Jim Irwin and how he was telling him about the moon mission. You just said a second ago that he actually killed somebody. Is that what you said?
Not James Irwin. James Irwin was about to confess that it was fake. Cyrus Eugene Akers is the person who was at Cannon Air Force Base as the chief of security at the Air Force's most secure base where they filmed the fake moon landing. It was he who killed a coworker to keep it a secret.
Oh wow!
And,
okay. Sorry, I missed that. So when did James Irwin? I guess when was he going to confess that? That's interesting.
In August of 1991, he was going to tell Bill Casey apparently all about it. And the day they were supposed to have their special talk, that was the day he had a heart attack. So somebody's phone was monitored, either Bill Casey's or the astronauts or both, and they took him out before they talked.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to Jim Irwin when you did all the astronaut encounters?
No, that was really before I started my investigation. I have met with about 9 Apollo astronauts, some off the record. Some have made it very clear to me that I'm correct. Good luck proving it when everyone wants to believe the lie.
Yeah.
So, what can you do? Right?
Man. So the astronaut said, yes, you're right. And they don't want to be named, pretty much.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean,
that is pretty dangerous.
If there were just one astronaut who claimed to walk on the moon one time, maybe they would have told the truth. But the problem is they're kind of ruining it for everybody, right? Wow. One confession is really confessing it for everybody. But one thing to say, I robbed a bank on such and such a day, I'm turning myself in. But it's another thing to say, and here's the list of the 5 guys who were with me doing it. You know what I mean? And so if one astronaut confesses the moon missions are fake, he's really confessing for everybody else against their will. You see.
So another question I just had here is, so where did they do the filming for, I guess, the moon, the surface of the moon?
Well, that was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968. According to Cyrus Eugene Akers, who was chief of security at the time, he said the 2 weeks prior to that, they brought in truckload nonstop around the clock of pulverized concrete to mimic the powdery lunar surface. They had 2 large airplane hangars that were connected to one another, and they removed the wall between them to give it as big a landscape as possible. He said there was a lot of construction going on the base at the time, so all these trucks coming in and out, no one really paid attention to them. He was told that if he ever told anybody about it, they would kill him and his family. And what a surprise when I talked to his son less than 2 years ago, confirming this information of my book. A few days after I talked to him, government agents showed up at his house less than 2 years ago, the son of Cyrus Eugene Akers, and they told him face to face, if he ever speaks to Bart Sibrel again about the fake moon landing that his father eyewitnessed, they will kill him and his family.
Wow.
So the government knows this is different. This could be the finger out of the dike that brings the government down if the truth comes out. That's what the NBC news director thought. And apparently that's what the government thinks, because even when another news director was going to broadcast it, the government, made a threatening phone call to them not to do it. Don't make us look bad. Don't prove that the government is run by a bunch of criminals, or else. You see?
Well, I have an interesting question for you. What percentage of astronauts you think are Freemasons? Do you have an idea?
Well, I haven't done the research, but people who have told me 100% of them are. So there's Masonic symbols throughout the photographs, rings, Masonic rings on the Masonic patches on their spacesuits and things like that. So,
wow. Now, do you believe that aliens are real or a hoax?
I think they're a hoax because Edgar Mitchell spent his whole life saying the moon landings are real and aliens are real. And so I believe that aliens are as real as the moon landings. One of the people on this list of eyewitnesses who was there at Cannon Air Force Base when they filmed the fake moon landing a year in advance, the list that President Johnson gave Cyrus Eugene Akers that I got and published in the book, his name is Robert Emenager. And to the best of my ability, the guy's still alive in his 90s. I never heard of the guy. So I looked him up, and he's a science fiction writer, kind of like a science fiction consultant, apparently. And he spent his whole life saying the moon missions are real and aliens are real. You see, they want us to believe in aliens really bad, which is all the more reason to doubt that they're real. I remember being in a hotel not too long ago, I think to do a TV interview about the moon landings. And I'm like, oh, what's on HBO here in the hotel? And there were 10 movies on. And 3 of the 10 were about aliens from outer space. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I mean, if 3 of the 10 movies were about how great the president is, or 3 of the 10 movies were about how terrible the president is, you could see there's a campaign going on here. And so if you go to Sibrel.com and you scroll down about halfway, I actually wrote an article that took me a couple of 100 hours to write and research called Are There Really Aliens from Outer Space? And I go into multiple scientific reasons and some scriptural reasons why that's simply not the case. And the article at Sibrel.com has multiple links in it. One of the links is a scientist giving a lecture. And he's saying, look, we've been pointing radio telescopes in all direction of the universe for 50 years, not one transmission. We're it. There's a book called The Privileged Planet that says this idea that life is abundant throughout the universe, the exact opposite is true. He says life should not even exist on Earth. It's like winning the Powerball lottery 20 times in a row. It just can't happen through evolution or by accident. It has to be intelligent design. And if you believe in the Bible, Revelation actually says we're the only intelligent life in the universe. In Revelation 21:3, it says when God makes the new heaven and the new earth that is like Eden, no more sin, the sinners are destroyed, not put in prison, it says destroyed. And it says then God will dwell with mankind. Now, multiple times in the Bible, it says God does not show partiality. He says, yes, the poor people are being taken advantage of by corrupt judges, but don't take a poor person's side just because they're poor. He actually says that too. And it says multiple times, God treats everybody the same. So if there's life on other planets and God dwells with us, like it says he's going to do, he's showing partiality. He's shown favor to us and not to them. The only way he can have a character that doesn't show partiality and dwell with us as if we're it. That's it. And isn't that interesting? It's the exact opposite of what the government wants us to believe. They want us to believe life is out there. We're not special, you see, but we are. We're it. This is it. And according to the Bible, angels are watching, seeing what's going to happen. And the longer I live and the more I study the Bible, the more I realize how this is really true. You know, Hebrews, I think 11 says we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. Those aren't dead people. Those are angels. And they're wondering what's going to happen. You know, how is this going to end? Because it's not looking good, right? Jesus said in Matthew 24:13, and remember, Jesus was sent to the church. He says, I was sent to Israel, not pagans. So when he says, wide is the gate, broad is the road that goes to destruction, and many go that way, and narrow is the way to life, and only a few find it. He's talking to the church. He's saying most believers are not going to make it. James 2 says even the demons believe in God. You see, so acknowledgement that Jesus is the Messiah and that there is a God is not salvation. The demons know that. It says in Shudder. It says this is love for God, to obey. Now we can't undo our sin. That's what grace is, but we have to obey to be saved. It says so dozens of times in the Bible. It says in Revelation that the cowardly, the unbelieving, and so forth will not inherit the kingdom of God. It says in the book of Acts that Jesus is the source of eternal salvation for those who obey him. There's two keys to open the safety deposit box to enter heaven. One is grace. Even if I give back money I stole, I can't undo that sour feeling and that loss. You see, have to have grace to enter heaven. But if I don't obey, then I'm no different than a pagan. Why should God save me? Right? It takes two keys, grace and obedience. It says so. And it says in Hebrews 2 that the Holy Spirit is given to those who obey God. Right? So this is the state of the world. And Matthew 24:13 says, the love of most believers will grow cold, but he who holds to the very end will be saved. And he says the reason for that state of things, most people falling away, most people who were saved becoming unsaved, is because of the increase of wickedness. You see, I remember like 30 years ago, there was a news story, shocking. A 12-year-old committed murder, shocking. And then 20 years ago, shocking. A 10-year-old committed murder. And then 10 years ago, shocking, an 8-year-old committed murder. The last time I had cable television, which was 20 years ago, flipping through the channels, and it had the little icon in the lower right-hand corner, MTV, VH1, and it said ABC Family Channel. ABC Family Channel. I'm like, oh, okay. But two teenagers make it out on the sofa, right? That's family, right? Because this is a fact. If that same program aired when Kennedy was president, the owner of the network or president of the network would have had a bang, bang, bang on his door at midnight by the FBI or FCC, and they would have dragged him off to jail for putting that on the air. So not only did it go from being illegal to being accepted, and went from being illegal to being family. I mean, you see, and so we have to get saved, stay saved. And to me, the moon landing has a spiritual point of view. I mean, they said about the Titanic, the largest ship ever built, the ship that God himself cannot sink. It says about the Tower of Babel, we're doing it just to boast, never finished. Putting a man on the moon, Nixon said, was the greatest event since creation. When he knew they weren't there. Mankind's greatest accomplishment, a complete lie. You see, 2 Thessalonians 2:9 says in the last days, which I think we're in, I think that would include 1969 also. It says there'll be counterfeit miracles. Putting a man on the moon's a modern day miracle, isn't it? It's a counterfeit miracle, isn't it? See, so the moon landing fraud has these spiritual overtones. And that's what convinced me that this is important for the truth to come out. It means something. It's symbolic of mankind's fall. and of our stupidity and our arrogance and our sin, and how we just, I mean, we can't even tell the truth that we set a goal and we couldn't do it. You know, that's pretty sad.
Wow. Yeah. What I was going to ask, I was going to bring up a point on the alien thing. Carol Rosen talked a lot about Werner von Braun, and she mentioned that he told her, like in the 70s, that they were going to try to do a fake alien invasion, and they were trying to put weapons in space, and that was how they're going to do it, is to have a fake alien invasion. Well, did you find it interesting that Trump introduced Space Force during his presidency?
I'm not sure what that's about. It kind of sounds funny. Space Force, I mean, I guess they're going to need something like that to go to the moon. So, I mean, they need something because the Saturn V rocket didn't do the job. I'm not sure. I mean, the idea of a fake alien invasion has actually been around 100 years. That was at the Jekyll Island meeting. I think the idea was in the minutes of being said by Mr. Dewey Decimal System. He wanted to control what people think by teaching what they want you to believe in schools in a uniform way. University, universal thinking. I was asked by the student body at the University of Pittsburgh to show my film and lecture about the moon landing fraud. Forbidden by the campus. They forbid it.
Wow.
I mean, that's pretty amazing. I asked my doctor, what do you know about natural medicine? She said, all I know is to give this pill for this illness because the pharmaceutical companies are financed the universities where I go. It's got to be corrupt things or lies that they want you to believe. And so he suggested in like 1911 or whenever that was, a fake alien invasion or rigging it somehow. And Reagan said it a couple of times. They really want us to believe in it. And this is what the alternative media people have to understand. This little last thing we've been going through for the last 3 years, there's two lies. There's one for the general public, the boogie illness came from an animal. And then there's a lie for the critical thinking people. Okay. It's from a facility. Very serious. They don't care why you believe it's real as long as you do. From an animal, from a facility. Same thing about the moon landing. The UFO community is intelligent. They realize these pictures were taken with electrical lighting. But they say we still went to the moon anyway to meet with aliens on the dark side. I'm like, NASA doesn't care why you believe this little thing's going on for the last 3 years as long as you do. From a facility, from an animal. They don't care why you think they can go to the moon, Neil Armstrong or secret cruise with aliens, as long as you do. We have to be careful. They can trick the alternative media people into believing what they want them to believe. They can leak, alleged documents from people confessing this, and that about a UFO. That's completely contrived. So be careful. They know how to push the buttons of everyone, including the alternative media people.
Okay. Wow. Well, I had one more question, and this will be a little bit controversial, but now I found out about your work through the research of a lot of people that believe in flat Earth, and I've been told that you don't necessarily believe that's true, but can you give me your thoughts about that research?
Well, I mean, when Bill Casey first went on Oprah and wrote a book, We Didn't Go to the Moon, they said, oh, you think the Earth is flat? You're crazy. When my film came out, they said, oh, you think the Earth is flat? You're crazy. So the whole flat Earth thing is, I believe, to discredit the fact that the moon landings are fake. That was the whole purpose of it. Now, the government is so corrupt and lies so much. Some people are so jaded. They think if the government says the sky is blue, it has to be green. And so if the government says it's a sphere, it has to be flat. Well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are two ways of being deceived. Everyone knows to have their radar up for being told something, billed as the truth, that is in fact a lie. But they forget the other 50% you can be deceived, which is being told the truth, spherical Earth, and thinking it's a lie. You see, wicked comes from candle wick, which actually has two strands, truth and lies mixed together. Secondly, it doesn't matter. Okay. The earth could be a triangle or a cube. The issue isn't geography. The issue is the corrupt federal government. Jesus never said that we have to pass a geography test in order to enter heaven. It doesn't matter. I don't buy into, the words indicate the earth is flat in the Bible. That's not true. Because Solomon said in the Song of Psalms, your eyes are rubies, your lips are diamonds. Okay, I guess she was some weird creature from Mars. No, it's a metaphor. People talked about the sun, moves this way because that's how they saw it. It's a metaphor. And again, it doesn't matter. Divide and conquer is what they want. It doesn't matter the shape of the earth. It's like Jesus was certainly not white. And he was probably brown. Okay, so in most churches, they have pictures of Jesus, white. Okay, so he's brown skinned. Okay, do you want to spend your whole life going from church to church, arguing, take down your pictures and put up ones with him having brown skin? It doesn't matter. And whatever the shape of the earth is, it doesn't matter. The most valuable thing that we have is time. We need to be seeking and saving the lost, not arguing over the shape of the earth, right? So tick tock, every debate that we spend wasting talking about the color of Jesus' skin or the shape of the earth is time not spent to seek and save the lost. We just lost a soul, just lost another one, you see.
Okay, well, I've looked into a lot of the research myself. I've shared some videos on it. I do think, from my point of view, that like you were mentioning about people that lie about the moon landings, it's a part of what we call scientism, right? Where people have been led to believe that something is true just because the authorities say it. I think flat Earth can be very beneficial to breaking down some of that stuff. But I appreciate that people have different opinions on that, and I guess everybody should look into it for themselves and make up their own minds. But it is something that I talk about on my channel, and other people have given me some really amazing things to look at. And there's a lot of right around the things you were talking about with them faking the moon landings. There's a lot of space art, and a lot of things go into that. And I just put a video out on that, on the reality of stars, where I talk about the space art, how they pretty much admit that these are all images. They're not actual pictures, So
yeah, to be quite honest, the flat earth channels or whatever have made some fabulous discoveries, in my opinion. Like all this fake footage coming from the space station, it's like, yeah, the guy's throwing balls around and then the balls disappear and he's still mimicking the balls, or his hand goes through, a pipe or whatever. That's obviously fake. Now, why are they doing that? I don't know. Maybe the space station crashed and they're too embarrassed to talk about it. I don't know. I do know GPS works, and I do know satellites work, and they have to be in orbit for them to work. And there's a guy who put a stick in the ground 2,000 years ago and was able to basically tell the shadow length and difference at noon from two cities so many miles apart, was able to use the math and map out the circumference of the earth within about 500 miles. It's pretty accurate for 2,000 years ago. Again, it doesn't matter. The issue isn't the color of Jesus's skin, and the issue isn't the shape of the earth. The issue is the corrupt federal government faking moon landings and killing their own people to cover it up. And if you believe God, the issue is not the shape of the earth or the color of Jesus's skin in order to enter heaven. It's repent of your sin, stay repentant until the day you die, and bring other people along, and spend your time converting people to Jesus, not to the shape of the earth or the color of skin.
Right. Well, man, can you tell people how they can find your content and how they can follow your work?
Yeah, just go to Sibrel.com, my last name.com, S as in Sam, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com. I also have a podcast on there that I just started that's subscriber based. You scroll down and not too far down, there's a button about that. And I do two podcasts, one kind of a weekly summary of the news that the alternative media is doing, kind of even looking critical at alternative media. And the second one called the End Times Church, where I talk about kind of Bible topics relating to the end times. So both of those podcasts are subscriber based at Sibrel.com.
Awesome. Well, man, you've given some very amazing information, some things I've never heard before, and definitely appreciate your work. And would you mind closing us out in prayer, brother?
Sure, be glad to. Thank you, Vince. Dear God, I love that we can disagree and still love each other and be brothers. I mean, I can just sense the love of Vince, that I can sense his devotion to you, Lord, devotion to truth. And I'm sure we'll have a big laugh. I'll have a laugh in heaven, Lord, that it really is flat, or we'll have a laugh that it's fair. I mean, I just see that, Lord. It doesn't matter. Help us just to love people, Lord. I feel like I had a fit of rage in traffic the other day, Lord. I've been feeling guilty all day about that. And help me to be kind on the road. Help me to overcome my character flaws, Lord. Help us to seek and save the lost. Help us to put open people in our path. Who are open to hearing the word. Help us to persevere, all of our friends, all of our family, to persevere to the end. Help us to be glorified with great projects and prosperity, so that we can use that to help other people who are lost or poor, Lord. Help us to be united in truth. Help us to seek and save the lost with your Bible, not so much our thoughts or philosophies. And I pray that Vince's personal challenges in life that he was going through are mended, that he overcomes, and that we all have a good sense of humor about it as the end days come. And we thank you for hearing our prayer. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Well, that'll be all for our episode today, guys. I really appreciate you for hanging out with us, and stay tuned for more content.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share the video with friends and family. You can follow me on Facebook at Untethered Truth Prevails. You can also find me on Twitter at Untethered Vince. If you'd like to give to me financially, you can go to Patreon, and you can find me there at Untethered Creations. I'm also on Venmo, and you can find me if you go to Vince-Barton-1. Once again, I really appreciate you all for joining me, and I wish you good success in the pursuit of truth. Grace and peace to you all.